And I'm joined in the studio by the gorgeous and fantastic and very brave and tenacious Mr. Will Geddes, security expert, to talk about, well, frankly, the perilous position we seem to be in now as a country. It's interesting there, Nigel, connecting the flight of people of wealth leaving the UK, yes, for taxation reasons and economic reasons, but also saying if we're going to attract people to stay in the UK, we've got to deal with security.
Yes.
Yet again.
Yeah.
Another frenzied knife attack. It's all becoming a bit too commonplace. We now know that Anthony Williams, 32, from Peterborough, has been charged with 10 counts of attempted murder, 1 count of actual bodily harm, 1 count of possession of bladed articles following that knife attack on a train in Cambridgeshire on Saturday, according to British Transport Police. British Transport Police also saying to the Daily Mail that the same suspect may have been involved in the attempted knife attack, which resulted in facial injuries earlier on in the day on the London Docklands Light Railway.
Yeah.
Why was he still wandering around?
I know, that's the big question. And I think one of the biggest problems is, and we have to go right back through consecutive governments, and it goes back to Theresa May, cutting, obviously, the police force by some 10,000 odd officers. And the problem is that even with the consecutive governments coming back and say, or the new government coming in and saying, you know what, we will recruit extra police officers. There is no such thing as a grow bag where you can simply put in the seeds and out pops a fully qualified, fully experienced police officer. So they've lost a great deal. There's also been problems with management within the police, which has then disincentivized, obviously, individuals from staying within the police. Their recruitment numbers are at the absolute lowest. And I've been predicting this for the last 10 years, that there almost has to be a supplement to the police force of the private sector to try and assist. And we've seen this particularly with RASP, for example, Royalty and Specialist Protection, where some of the duties there are being actually engaged and implemented by people within the private sector. So the challenges are, as you rightly say, Nigel Farage has turned around and said, this country is deteriorating. You know, all too often you hear people are talking about broke Britain, and it's broke societally. That's the biggest problem that we have here. And what was indicative on this attack in Huntingdon was the fact that there are, I mean, and you have to look at this pragmatically. In the last 12 months, there were 10 violent assaults on trains every single day. There were 1,500 violent and extreme sexual assaults carried out over the entire year. We're looking at places where, unfortunately, things are shaving back. The rail users aren't seeing any difference in the prices and the fares that they're being charged. They're increasing every year. And yet the government is doing very little, or it's token nods, by saying, well, we'll donate 10 million here to the protection of mosques or to synagogues or whatever.
The problem's not that they're things that must be running a lot deeper. Because when I look at the situation, most of the attacks taking place are knife attacks. And you can't just go, right, we're now going to ban kitchen knives. I like cooking. I need my kitchen knives in order to finely dice and Juliet's my vegetables. But when you look at statistics, and I've been doing some digging on this, there has essentially been an attack every single week, a knife attack or a murder attack every single week by someone with a mental health condition. And there can't be more knives in the world than there have been before. What we've got is more people who seem to be prepared to use them, and we seem to have fewer people being apprehended, stop and search being scrapped, for instance. But I also wonder how much other wokery is at the heart of this when it comes to looking at things such as saying, well, you know, the streets being riddled with psychosis-inducing drugs, the police saying, well, we're not going to apprehend people in possession of cannabis from this community because we might be considered racist, and we know that there's a direct connection between that particular drug and propensity for psychosis, which is far more pronounced within the young black male community. I mean, at the heart of all of this, yes, I agree with you, the points on austerity and cutting numbers, but there's also some sort of insidious mindset of weakness. No,
totally, and an apathy, which is sort of prevailing. And I think it's also important to not just broad brush many of the root causes. So, for example, to attribute mental health issues as this sort of cover-all umbrella term to be used, I think is insidious at best. When you bear in mind that the vast majority, and I've done a lot of studying across causation of violence, and particularly terrorism, and being attributable to mental health. A lot of people who suffer mental health are incredibly passive people. They're more likely to harm themselves than they are to harm other people. So you're moving up the spectrum, and it's a wide spectrum that draws over to the more psychosis and psychopathic aspects where individuals. But even if you look in the instances of a terrorist, someone who is determined to go out there, blow themselves up, stab other people, or harm people in some shape or form, that one could say that's mental health, but you can't use it as a justification for all of this. And there is also the question of the judicial system. I know people in the police forces who are arresting people, they're putting them into the Crown Prosecution Service for prosecution, and then they're getting lenient services or only serving less than half their term that they are subsequently sentenced with. So the whole thing is a mess, Alex.
I get the impression there are lots of ticking time bombs out there, pretty disturbed people. I mean, look, most ordinary people wouldn't have the gumption to be able to drive a knife into somebody. I think it does take for someone to be slightly balmy to be able to do this. And yet we've got rid of things like residential mental health care. And I think there's far too much, well, we can't do that because we might be considered racist, or everyone's, you know, treated equally. When you look at the statistics, you're 10 times more likely to get psychosis if you smoke weed and have a deep predisposition. You're 10 times more likely to have a predisposition if you happen to be a young black male, and you're 10 times more likely if you smoke weed and have psychosis to end up in prison. It's really not that difficult to look at the connections here. But my big question of the day, and something that I've been talking about a lot, not just as a result of what happened on that train in Cambridgeshire, but for a long time, is that feeling of how do I defend myself? Because the government's not doing it, the police aren't doing it. As you know, Will, I have left London because I was fed up with having that feeling of looking round over my shoulder, or actually what most women do, I'm sure, is they look at the shop windows as they pass at the reflection to see who's walking behind. You know, thinking, well, I better not have my earphones in. I won't take my phone out of my handbag. Who's that creepy man leering at me? I'm going to cross the road. I moved out to the countryside, and thankfully it's a lovely little cocooned world in which those fears don't exist in my life anymore. But I commute on the train every day. So all of a sudden, there's a new palpable sense of anxiety getting on a train station when it pulls into those big urban conurbations and people are getting on in hoodies. All of a sudden now, you could cut the tension in the air with a knife on the train. And my argument is, it's not a level playing field.
No.
These people have balaclavas, they have knives, they don't care. We have nothing. I've got nothing. Well, what am I supposed to do? Right? The government's not going to be there to defend me. The police are not there to defend me. I've got to take matters into my own hand. In theory, pepper spray's illegal. How on earth, as a 5'3" woman, if something happens and I need to defend myself or even help defend other people, what can I do?
Yeah, I know. And you know what? It's a very, very difficult question to answer right now, other than obviously trying to equip yourself as best you possibly can to deal with the situation with items which are not illegal. I don't want to go into detail on air, but there are things that you could potentially use that are very comparable to pepper gas. But if you get caught with pepper gas, and I know a lot of women who have turned around to me and said, I'd managed to acquire some when I was on the continent, when I was in France or Paris or wherever it might be, and I brought it back with me, and I'm going, yeah, but if you get caught with that, you're going to potentially get prosecuted.
Right, but I suppose women are saying, I'd rather run that risk than the other possible outcome, which is far worse.
Yeah, absolutely, and I totally agree with you. I think that there is almost something that I've been trying to garnish, certainly amongst my male community, and those that are not actually within my industry sector, because I know certainly many guys who are in my industry sector, if they were walking down the road and they saw a woman being sort of harassed by a man, and they could determine, obviously, and there are ways to determine whether it was a domestic dispute, you know, it's just a good Barney and a shout-out which is happening on the street, or whether it's a total stranger, that they would intervene, they would get involved, as would I. But a lot of other guys I've tried to engage with to say, look, we as men have a responsibility to assist if we see a woman in distress on a tube, in the street, in a club, wherever.
I saw an advert saying similar, an official government advert saying look after, I think it was on the radio, I heard it, look after one another. I thought, blimmin' heck, the governments are that useless now, like a days ago. They're like, right, people, you've got to defend each other.
Sadly, we got nothing else to rely on. I mean, because the government isn't stepping up. And I mean, and there are so many things they could be doing.
And
Alex, there are so many things they could be doing.